Tinatanggap ko po ang inyong nominasyon sa akin bilang kandidato sa pagkapangulo ng Republika ng Pilipinas. I am a fighter and I will always be a fighter inside and outside the ring.
You just heard Senator Manny Pacquiao formally announcing his bid for the presidency in 2022. The Pimentel faction of the PDP Laban chose the boxer-turned-lawmaker as their standard-bearer for next year. But the other wing of the party is already challenging Pacquiao's decision.
The Cusi camp of PDP Laban says the senator's nomination violates party rules and is therefore illegal. The other faction Secretary General Attorney Melvin Matibag is confident, though, that the Commission on Elections will side with their group.
Matatalo sa election. Because the assembly is illegal, then there is a violation of the Constitution on the part of the attendees.
Good evening, I'm Gretchen Ho.
And I'm Ed Lingao. You're watching The Big Story. We begin tonight with what is officially the second hat tossed into the presidential derby. Boxing champion Senator Manny Pacquiao has finally decided he'll be running for president in the 2022 polls.
But is he the legitimate PDP Laban standard bearer, given that there are two factions within the ruling party? Mayan Los Baños has that story.
Tinatanggap ko po ang inyong nominasyon sa akin bilang kandidato sa pagkapangulo ng Republika ng Pilipinas.
It's official. Boxing champ and Senator Manny Pacquiao will be facing his toughest battle yet, a presidential bid in the 2022 elections. In Sunday's national convention, the Pimentel faction of PDP Laban declared Pacquiao as its standard bearer. In his speech, Pacquiao reissued his warning to corrupt officials.
Malapit na kayong magsama-sama sa kulungan. Your time is up.
PDP Laban Chairman Senator Coco Pimentel also vowed to push back against the PDP Laban faction of Energy Secretary Alfonso Cusis.
Hindi po natin papayagan ang pag-hijack ng ating partido. Isa lang ang partido natin ang PDP Laban. Yung kabila patalon-talon na partido.
Question is, which is the true PDP Laban? Last week, the Cusi camp filed a petition before the COMELEC to stop the group of Pacquiao and Pimentel from representing PDP Laban and taking actions related to the party. But even without the COMELEC's decision yet, the Cusi camp is claiming Pacquiao's national convention was illegal.
May sinabi rin si Senator Pimentel during the convention na mga hijack yung partido, di mo ba, mga bagong salta. Kung merong bagong salta at gustong maging mamuno sa partido, walang iba kundi si Senator Pacquiao. Hindi naman siya original na PDP Galing siya ng LP, ng Lakas. Sabi natin yung assembly that is a comedy. Now there is a drama. It will probably end in a tragedy. Matatalo sa COMELEC, matatalo sa election. Because the assembly is illegal, there is a violation of the Constitution on the part of the attendees.
The Cusi faction insists the tandem of Senator Bongo and President Rodrigo Duterte will represent PDP Laban in the coming polls. This is even if Go has repeatedly refused the offer to be the party standard bearer. So for now at least, the Cusi faction only has a sure vice presidential bet in President Duterte, while the Pimentel wing has yet to come up with Pacquiao's running mate. Reporting for News 5, Mayan Los Baños, we are One News.
And with no certainty yet as to who will carry the PDP Laban banner in next year's elections, let us talk with one of the factions as to what their game plan looks like. And we have on the big story, National Chairman and PDP Laban founding member, Senator Coco Pimentel. Senator Coco, maraming salamat po for joining us tonight and welcome to The Big Story.
Salamat, Ed, for inviting me. Mayang gabi sa tanan.
Yes, sir. Sir, sabi nga ninyo, at least kahapon, sabi nyo, iisa lang ang partido. Pero, well, clearly, ngayon, meron ng dalawang faction po na naglalaban. What was only up?
Ed,
Yes, sir.
Ed, ang sinabi ko, iisa lang yung partido namin. Ako, isa lang, PDP Laban since 1980s. Yung mga kausap ko ng mga grassroots delegates sa National Assembly namin, mga ano yun eh, mga long-time party members yun eh.
Yes,
Kaya
sir.
nga, we only know one and only one party, PDP Laban. Yun po sinasabi ko. Ngayon, kami ang balak paalisin, patalsikin sa partido ng mga mga sumakay sa partido. Kami pa mawawalan ng partido kaya hindi namin ma-imagine yun. Kaya we have only one party, the PDP Laban. And then sa mata rin namin, there's only one PDP Laban. Ito po yung aming grupo. This is the PDP Laban. Kaya ayaw na namin tawagin yung kabila ng wing of action. Ano lang sila, they are just a group. They are just a group claiming to be affiliated with PDP Laban.
Yes, sir. And well, sir, to be clear din po, you are a founding member of the PDP Laban way back in the 1980s.
We have to correct that because I am not that old then, Ed.
Sorry, sir. So it's your father lang.
I was a teenager in the 1980s, in 82. Yeah, medyo nasa teens pa po ako dyan. So,
yes, sir.
I witnessed everything pero hindi ako founding member kasama ng tatay
Okay,
ko.
you were a witness to the... Yes, sir. Sige, sir.
Yes,
sir,
yes.
But my question is this, sir. My question is this, well, clearly what was only a political fight is now turning out to be a legal fight. And of course, it is going to end up in COMELEC. May petition na against you by Cusi's group. My question to you po is this, how do you intend to prove to the COMELEC, of course it is the COMELEC, at least initially, that will decide, how will you prove to the COMELEC that you are the PDP Laban, that you represent the PDP Laban as espoused in its charter, in its constitution, in its bylaws?
Yes, we are the original kasi we are the original PDP Laban. We are the legitimate PDP Laban. If COMELEC will trace back the papers, the paper trail, their communication with PDP Laban, they will always come back to us. Okay, so there is a group wanting to change it. So the burden is on them. Sila mag-prove how were they able to legitimately grab power from the leadership, from the legitimate leadership of PDP Laban, and then they are now claiming to be the new leaders of PDP Laban. The burden is on them to prove that, not on us, kasi kami yung normal party na kausap ng COMELEC. Kami
Yes, sir.
po yun,
Through the years and through the elections. Yes, sir, we understand.
Through the decades, they look at the papers filed with them. It bore my signature. The constitution that we are using, PDP Laban, bears my signature. Ako po sumulat niyan. Ngayon, the party headquarters registered with COMELEC is our party headquarters. The email address officially registered with COMELEC is our email address. So, ando na po lahat eh. I mean, it is not for us. The burden is not with us.
Yes, sir.
Those who claim na nagbago ang sitwasyon, the burden is with them to show to the COMELEC why. Why all of a sudden? Tapos ang gagawin nilang walang partido, kami, isa lang ang partido namin.
Yes, sir.
Tapos
Yes, sir.
kasi wala na kaming party. How is that possible?
Sir, but I need to ask you this din kasi in our discussions with the COMELEC, nasabi rin ng COMELEC, wala naman po doon sa seniority sa partido yung pagdidesisyon kung sino ang kinatawan ng partido, kundi nasa sa kung sino ang sumunod doon sa patakaran at bylaws ng partido. In other words, you may be an old-timer.
Yes, oo nga.
Technically, you may be an old-timer but you may also be taken out of the party by newcomers. Case in point po, sinasite po ng grupo ni Matibag, ang kaso raw po ni Manny Pacquiao, who has never run under the PDP Laban for any elective positions. That's one of their major points.
I have read their petition. They did not make that a point. Wala po yun. I have read their petition. Wala yan. They did not make that a point because that is not a point. Manny Pacquiao, I have pictures taking his oath to PDP in 2012. 2012 po yun. Mas maaga pa sa kanila, sa mga power grabbers. Mas maaga si Manny Pacquiao. Tama po yun. They will have to show, the power grabbers, those who want to convince COMELEC that there is a new leadership in PDP Laban, must show to the COMELEC 100% compliance with our party constitution. Tama po yun kasi they're the ones changing. They're the ones claiming the change circumstances. The burden
is on them. That's what you're saying.
Adherence to the constitution, which I wrote, alam ko yung nakasulat sa constitution, and they must show 100% compliance. Okay? No mistakes. Because kung meron silang mistake, they did not legitimately grab power. Kasi ano sila power grabbers nga sila, hijackers nga sila sa mata namin.
Yes, sir. Well, sir, we wish we had more time with you. Baka we can invite you to a later episode with the chiefs naman, later on in the week.
We just coordinate our schedules.
Yes, sir.
Okay naman po.
Maraming salamat po.
Thank you very much.
PDP
Thank you.
Chairman, PDP Laban Chairman, Senator Coco Pimentel, maraming salamat, sir, for joining us tonight. The PDP Laban has some sorting out to do, but so does the opposition. Manila Mayor Isko Moreno says he is all ears as he admits to talking to Vice President Lenny Robredo and even Manny Pacquiao. He did not disclose details of the meetings, but said he hopes for more meetings. Moreno is positive that a decision will be reached in the coming days. Robredo has expressed readiness to run for president if she is chosen as a unity candidate by the opposition. Her possible bid, she says, is meant to put a stop to the current administration's hold on government and a possible return of the Marcoses to power. And speaking of the Marcoses, Partido Federal ng Pilipinas already endorsed Bongbong Marcos as its standard bearer for 2022. The party's chairmanship was also reserved for the former strongman's son.
These are the other big stories tonight. There's been a noted downtrend in COVID infections nationwide and in Metro Manila, but the health department says cases have yet to peak. The president finally gave the pilot run of face-to-face classes a nod. No definite schedule yet, though, but the trial is expected to cover 120 schools, both private and public. And after close to 3 decades, the country finally snaps its U.S. Open pool drought. Pinoy pride Carlo Biado admits to taking cues from the magician, Efren Bata Reyes himself. These big stories after the break.
Good evening. You are still watching The Big Story. I'm Ed Lingao.
And I'm Gretchen Ho. Limited face-to-face classes would take place soon in 120 schools with less hours and students.
But as early as now, some schools have already been gearing up in case they are chosen to take part in the pilot run. Jenny Dongon with the story.
Pilot testing of face-to-face classes is finally a go. President Duterte has greenlit the limited trial, at least in areas deemed low risk for COVID-19. It will cover 100 public schools and 20 private schools, handpicked by the Education and Health departments.
Kailangan, numero uno, papasa sa safety assessment ng Department of Education ang lugar kung saan tayo mag-hold ng face-to-face classes. Kailangan pumayag ang local governments. Kailangan may written consent ng mga parents.
The pilot run will be held for half a day every other week. The number of participants will vary. 12 students for kindergarten, 16 for grades 1 to 3, and up to 20 for vocational classes. There will also be adjustments based on periodic risk assessments. Kapitbahayan Elementary School in Navotas has been preparing its modified classrooms just in case it gets selected. To date, Navotas has about 1,500 active cases.
Sinigurado natin na bawat desk ay nilagyan po natin ng barrier at ang bawat bata po ay mga may sanitation rin po silang dala.
School Principal Floreta Quijano said all of their teachers and staff have been fully vaccinated against COVID-19, but parents remain mixed over the possible return to traditional classes.
Minsan gusto ko nang pahintuin sa sa online, parang alam siyang masyadong natutunan nung...
Kami may pasok din sa trabaho, hindi naman po pwede na tutukan namin sila kasi wala na po kami makain.
Okay naman po kahit magano kami ng online class.
Bakit po?
Kasi parang mas ligtas yung mga anak namin. sa virus.
Education Secretary Leonor Biones said blended learning would go on as usual. They are still awaiting the president's instruction as to when to commence the pilot run. This school year has sent 28 million enrollees, higher than last year's 26.2 million. For News 5, Jenny Dongon, We Are One News.
The health department has noted a decline in COVID infections nationwide and in the capital, but says COVID cases in the NCR have yet to reach its peak. They see cases reaching its highest by the end of September or by early next month. Metro Manila is seeing a negative 13% growth rate. This means there is a slowing down and a decrease in infections based on the average number of cases. From nearly 6,000 last week, COVID-19 cases in the NCR dropped to only 5,100 this week. Just today, DOH logged nearly 19,000 new cases in the country. The Philippines' total case tally is now at over 2.38 million. 176,800 of this number considered active or are still undergoing treatment. The health department also reported today an additional 319 cases of the Delta variant. That pushes total Delta cases to more than 3,000. This covers 24.16% or nearly 1 out of every 4 of the total sample sequence. The Delta variant is now the most common COVID-19 lineage in the country. After the president's attacks on the Red Cross or its chairman, Senator Richard Gordon, the PRC now becomes the subject of a House panel's hearing after a lawmaker alleged false positive results in its Subic laboratory. Marian Enriquez has the big story.
The Philippine Red Cross is now being targeted in a House panel hearing. House Deputy Speaker Rodante Marcoleta raised an issue against the agency. He claimed that the agency's Subic lab yielded false positive RT-PCR tests for health workers. Health Secretary Francisco Duque confirmed the report. He said out of the 49 who tested positive in September 3, 44 came out negative in another test in a different laboratory 3 days after.
Which is being investigated now by the lab network headed by under Assistant Secretary Nestor Santiago, whom I believe has already relayed to the RITM to do an evaluation.
Cases like this, said Duque, is an outlier.
The percentage of positivity at about 89% is certainly out of the ordinary.
According to him, the government, through PhilHealth, has paid PRC 6 billion pesos for RT-PCR tests. For another lawmaker, Quezon's 2nd District Representative J.J. Suarez, the government should closely monitor testing laboratories as false positives may cause mental anguish.
Binabayaran naman natin yung pagtitest. So dapat ang makuha nating resulta ay yung totoo naman.
Duque said that they will still have to wait on the result of the investigation. They will submit the consolidated evaluation to be undertaken by the RITM. It will then be forwarded to the Health Facility Service Regulatory Bureau for determination and possible sanctions. The PRC, headed by Senator Richard Gordon, has yet to make a comment. Gordon has been the subject of President Duterte's ire. He heads the Senate Blue Ribbon panel probing government's purchase of alleged overpriced pandemic supplies. For News 5, Marian Enriquez, We Are One News.
For the big story in sports, the country's 27-year title drought in the U.S. Open pool finally came to an end thanks to a massive rally by Pinoy pool player Carlo Biado. A look into Biado's historic win in my report. The Philippines is back in world pool supremacy. Filipino billiards champion Carlo Biado mounted a huge rally to beat Singapore's Aloysius Yap 13-8 to win the U.S. Open Pool Championship. Biado showed nerves of steel and rallied back from 3-8 to win 10 consecutive racks. His new title comes with a prize pot of $50,000.
Sabi ko sa sarili ko na sana mabigyan ako ng isang chance, na mabigyan ako ng isang pagkakataon para makaarangkada ako. At ayun, sumablay siya sa last ball, yung 9 ball. Sabi ko, baka ito na yun.
What gave him the additional boost was his wife's presence in the match.
Yung misis ko nandun, nakatapat sa akin. Tsaka sumenya siya sa akin ng ganun eh. So, ibig sabihin, pakiramdam ko mananalo ako. Kasi bago mo yung laban, sinabi niya sa akin na mananalo kami.
The 37-year-old admitted that it was tough for pool players like him during the pandemic. That's why he decided to play and try his luck in the United States, a sacrifice that paid off.
Noong April, hindi ko talaga gustong lumipad papunta rito sa Amerika dahil ayoko iwan yung family ko. Naisip ko naman na wala ring buhay dito. Hindi kami makapag-practice sa Pilipinas. Pinikayat ako ni Mrs. na pumunta ako dito sa Amerika dahil kung dito ka lang, walang mangyayari sa atin.
The victory puts Biado as the first Filipino to win the US Open 9-ball title since pool legend Efren Bata Reyes win in 1994 after 27 years. Biado, of course, made sure to thank the magician for all of the lessons.
Tata Efren, napakalaking bagay para sa aming mga atletang bilyarista dahil yung mga nalalaman niyang tira sa larangan ng bilyar ay sinishare niya sa amin. Kaya yun yung advantage naming mga Pilipino na wala dun sa mga ibang player ng ibang bansa.
Carlo plans to take a few days off before going back to the country. And with his recent win, he hopes to inspire young pool players to keep going despite the tough times.
Maging masipag lang at disiplina sa sarili. Masipag at tiyaga lang naman kailangan dyan at saka kailangan din ng dasal. Makakamit din nila yung mga nangangarap din na maging katulad ko.
Gretchen Ho, We Are One News. Time for another quick break. More of the big stories when we return.
Good evening. You're still watching The Big Story. I'm Edlin Gao.
And I'm Gretchen Ho. Houses of COVID-positive residents in Pateros will now bear a marker, yellow ribbons.
The city LGU says this will allow for easy monitoring, but the Commission on Human Rights warns that this may result in discrimination. Jenny Dongon with the story.
Yellow barricade tapes are tied as ribbons in front of houses in Pateros. This is how local officials in Pateros determined which households are infected or tagged as close contacts. The LGU says this is an easy way to monitor the COVID-19 situation in their area.
Ang problema natin, maraming asymptomatic. Marami kaming insidente rito, lalabas. Ang katwiran, wala naman kami nararamdaman. So ang magiging problema, maski ikaw na kapitbahay, hindi mo alam na positive to.
Pateros Mayor Miguel Ponce III maintained that the goal is not to discriminate but to detect infection before it gets worse. Ponce says the use of yellow ribbon marks is purely voluntary and involves no politics.
Pero kung magpapaka-plastic tayo, may COVID ka na rito, ayaw mo pang aminin. Kung magpapaka-sensitive tayo, walang mangyayari.
Despite this, Pateros residents have mixed opinions on the matter.
Nakaka-degrade naman dun sa pamilyang itatag nyo kung isa lang naman ang positive.
Magiging safe po tayo ro kasi alam na natin sa lugar na yon na gradual lockdown. Makakaiwas po kami sa mga hawa-hawa.
Ponce also clarified that there will be no penalty for COVID-positive residents who refuse to have yellow ribbons tied in their houses. The Interior Department also approved this initiative by the Pateros LGU.
Mabuti na meron na tayong yellow tag na kasi unang-una sa gradual lockdown Identify mo na yung bahay.
The Commission on Human Rights has reminded the government to be mindful of the social stigma that may arise from the mechanism. The CHR explained that the overt labeling of individuals affected by the disease may result to discrimination. For News 5, Jenny Dongon, We Are One News.
Young artist Bree Johnson was found dead in a La Union hostel. The body of the 30-year-old was found lifeless over the weekend. Her companion, Julian Roberto Ompin, was taken into custody after illegal drugs were seized in their hostel room. According to sources, Ompin had already been released. Johnson's family laments the slow progress of the investigation, with the artist's body yet to be autopsied.
Ang pinaka-objective talaga namin is magawa yung autopsy, and then from there on, we will plan on our end kung ano ba talaga ang dapat namin gawin.
Netflix took The Crown and The Throne of this year's Primetime Emmy Awards. It led all platforms with 44 awards, the most in CBS's record in 1974. HBO and Disney Plus trailed with 19 and 14 each. The Crown bagged 11 awards, including Outstanding Drama Series and all the acting categories.
Men are going to come along.
Queen's Gambit also took home 11 awards, including Outstanding Limited Series. Executive producer William Hallberg gave its star Anya Taylor-Joy a shout-out.
You inspired a whole generation of girls and young women to realize that patriarchy simply has no defense against our queens.
Apple TV Plus, meanwhile, joined the big league, thanks to Ted Lasso winning 7 Emmys, including Outstanding Comedy Series and Lead Actor.
But the biggest thank you from this group is to the people that watch.
HBO's Mayor of Easttown, meanwhile, took home 3 of the 4 acting awards for a limited series, with Kate Winslet as Outstanding Actress. RuPaul also made history as the person of color with the show's most awards at 11. It's also one for the books for women directors, as Jessica Hobbs of The Crown and Lucia Aniello of HBO's Hacks swept the directing categories in the same year. This year's Emmy saw around 500 socially distanced guests. It was held at the live event deck in Los Angeles, instead of the usual Microsoft Theater. Nick Garcia, We Are One News.
There's the latest series that I watched, Morning Show. Napanood mo na yun?
That's a series ba? I know there was a movie before, Morning
Second,
Show.
season 2, manood ka.
But there was a movie before kasi about the morning shows eh.
Ay, hindi.
It was
Morning
really
Show
funny.
lang, Jennifer Aniston. It's a story about us. Our lives in the news.
You know, if they put the news in the Emmys, ang daming papasukan categories eh.
Naku.
May drama, tragedy, comedy.
Well, good thing that we're ending this with a smile. That wraps up today's big story. Catch us again tomorrow at 8 p.m. on Signal Channels 8 and 250.
Please like our Facebook page, One News. For more in-depth analysis, visit our webpage, onenews.ph. Mask on.
Wash hands.
And stay safe, Philippines. On behalf of Robbie Alampay, I'm Ed Lingao.
And I'm Gretchen Hall. We are One News. Have a good evening.
Dito na.